In his short time in the UFC, Ian Machado Garry has accumulated several impressive victories. The young fighter leads the welterweight division, knocking on the door of an opportunity for the title. And at the same time, a group within the MMA community also grows, determined to exploit Ian's personal life to entertain himself, discredit him as a fighter, and twist many aspects of his life. But why? When Ian, the future Garry, arrived at the UFC, he was as confident and daring as he is now. However, he was younger, and with youth, a lack of identity can come while people try to find their place in the world. For Ian, this manifested itself in idolizing Conor McGregor. By repeating his iconic phrases and emulating his way of walking, Ian felt that he was following in the footsteps of a childhood hero. However, what the MMA community saw was a lack of identity and a social clumsiness that produced several embarrassing moments. But is being cheesy really a sin? Many of the most beloved fighters in the UFC tend to be sentimental or clumsy. No, the reason why Ian Garry receives a disproportionate amount of hate online is the moment when he became Ian Machado Garry. When Ian married Layla, it quickly became evident that the MMA community did not approve it. It is very difficult to specify exactly what was the first thing that drove the fans away from Lee, but it is reasonable to suggest that they found the relationship very confusing. In their minds, Ian was a rising superstar who could probably be with any girl he liked. However, here he was in a relationship with a 14-year-old woman older than him, who already had a son from a previous marriage. This dynamic left Andrew Tate's followers speechless. The top GS, who have always inhabited the darkest corners of the UFC audience, and got down to work to do everything possible to prove that Layla was actually planning a master plan to deceive Ian and keep all his money, because they just couldn't accept that he had fallen in love with her. One of the first test elements presented by the fans was a book that Layla wrote more than a decade ago, titled How to Be a Whack. She wrote the plans for that, How to Be a Whack. The girl was selling a book called Whack, which means wife and girlfriend. Haven't you read the book How to Be a Whack? Doesn't it ring a bell? No, I'm not a reader. You're not a reader. They decide, without having actually read the book, that it must be a serious and instructive guide on how to extort money from young and rich men through divorce agreements. She released the fact that she wrote a book about how to find young athletes to sit with. She's 40. She wrote a fucking book about how to be older and be with a young athlete. I'm not lying, brother. This is a fact. However, surprisingly, it turned out to be none of that. But I researched the book, and the book is not serious. Yes, it's like a satire. It's satire? Yes. I can hardly call myself the author of a satirical story of only 11 pages, available only in audible format. But let's not let this possible Jezebel convince us just with her word. Let's really listen to the free sample and decide for ourselves if this is really a joke or not. Beauty and style. The whack style is something you can recognize from miles away. It's an intentional, striking, and polished look. But let's also be fair to the senseless critics of Ian's and his wife's humor. That this book was conceived as a joke doesn't mean she's not taking advantage of it, right? After all, she's nobody, and Ian is one of the 5 best welterweights in the UFC. Surely he has all the money, right? She wrote a book about the whacks. Basically, she manipulated you because she's much older than you. This is not right, friend. She's a succubus. Layla Anna Lee is a sports presenter with British and Brazilian heritage. She had made a name for herself by presenting the BMX at the European Cycling Championship en route before being asked to be the female voice of the opening ceremony of the London 2012 Olympic Games. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand up to welcome Your Majesty the Queen and Your Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. I was a good friend of BMX cyclists. I used to love BMX cycling and being there, and one of my friends was the current champion at the time. And that same year, she was included in the list of the 100 most influential creative people in Great Britain, according to Time Out magazine. She developed a passion for mixed martial arts, MMA, and began to present for the biggest promoter of the United Kingdom, Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors is back in the fighting city of Liverpool. Before being called to the big leagues to present UFC Connected, the proud Liverpool fighter, please welcome Darren Till. So, the MMA community would make you believe that she thought that her best path to fame and fortune was to start out with an MMA fighter without experience, who had not even reached the UFC. And don't forget that when she finally entered the UFC, Garry signed a basic contract of 12 and 12 and only received $50,000 for beating Neil Magny. Hardly the territory of a fortune hunter. This partially discredits the idea that Layla was using Ian to boost her career, since she had already achieved all these things before even knowing him. In fact, Ian did not make his debut as an amateur until 5 years after Layla was already announcing the Olympic Games, which really highlights the next big problem that the MMA community had with Layla. Without a doubt, the biggest thing I've done wrong is getting old. If we are honest, part of the reason why the MMA community feels so repelled by Annalie is her misogyny around her age. Hey, getting old is not acceptable. So I'm a little older. It would be difficult to imagine that the same energy would be maintained if a 40-year-old man who worked for the UFC started out with a 20-something fighter, like former UFC commentator Dan Hardy and his wife, Veronica, including men who are dating women with exactly the same age difference. They have definitely also felt offended by that. But wait, said the inhabitants of the atmosphere. It's different when a woman is older. She can't have children and her appearance will fade. Well, since Ian and Layla have already conceived their first child, this point seems irrelevant. And it's not that it really matters, but 2 children and a decade later, Layla doesn't seem much older, since she was named one of the 100 sexiest women in the world by FHM in 2013. However, there is one more reason, perhaps even more immature and pathetic, why the MMA fans hate Ian and his wife. Before Ian met Layla, she was married to a man named Richard Cullen, with whom he had a son. This relationship, like most relationships, did not work in the long run, and the couple separated in a friendly way, but they remained friends. When Garry and Annalie got married, Garry adopted the last name Machado, and the couple took the compound last name Machado Garry. Would you rather the media call you that in the stories? What do you want us to call you? Ian Machado Garry. That's my name. The fans went crazy. To their eyes, taking your wife's last name was seen as the culmination of the behavior of a soy boy, and the fact that it used to be the last name of his ex-husband made it even worse. Would you take your wife's last name? Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? That's the biggest joke I've ever seen. No, I wouldn't take my wife's last name. However, those of you with a good eye for detail probably realize that Machado does not appear anywhere in the name Richard Cullen. That's because, of course, it's not even his name. The internet simply invented it. Machado is, in fact, Layla's single last name. You know, the one she was born with. Last name. You maternal last name. His mother's last name. His mother's last name. They decided that their children would feel more like a family if they shared the same last name. Not because Ian wants to be sexually dominated in the strangest way possible, but the truth is that I only did it because I wanted my son and my stepson to really feel connected. All right, say the sweaty UFC fans behind their keyboard. But why is her ex always with them if he doesn't keep sleeping with his wife? You have to think, what's going on when Ian Garry is not at home? Things that people have been saying, that my ex-husband lives with us. No, it's not like that. Well, to begin with, Ian doesn't like the idea of damaging the relationship between his stepson and the child's biological father. Hey friend, do you want to travel the world? I'm a nutritionist, and we can do all of this together. We all can. You can come see your son whenever you want. You two can be there. They're both going to Disney this morning. And your son, and make them go through fights and arguments because I don't want them close. No, I'm a bigger man than that. I understand that there is a child in all of this. Maybe. So, to make sure that Richard can regularly see his son while the family travels, Ian hired him as his nutritionist, and he's really good at what he does. Okay? To the point where we've made every weight cut for the UFC, and they've been easier and easier and easier every time. That's a confidence that we don't have, you know, because we think Maybe he has to fight this guy. Maybe he's a good person. But when you can kill people with your own hands, you'd say, hey, invite all your exes to dinner. You could see it another way. You'd say, hey, your ex is making me salmon. Oh yeah? Yeah, put on the apron. It's not uncommon for things to get heated in preparation for fights. But that doesn't mean that as a community, we have to resort to exaggerated stories and cruelty to entertain ourselves. But there's a limit. There's a limit to what you say and what you do. And it's not talking trash, calling my wife a pedophile, or saying that the child isn't even mine. To be fair with Ian, he doesn't seem to be affected by all the hate. He's definitely found ways to keep his focus and keep winning within the octagon. Hey, I don't have time for people's opinions. The negativity, deactivating your comments and notifications honestly changes the world. Now, all this doesn't mean that you have to like either one. The epically embarrassing blogs that Layla writes about how Ian wants to fight all the men in any room may sound great in his head, but they make Ian seem incredibly insecure. The door's open, Kamset and his wife. I would love for him to fight here. I would simply love to exchange blows with Kamsat in the middle of an elevator. I would love, the stories would have been fucking great. And my wife like this, looking at me as if her eyes had come out of her head. And she says, do it. We leave the elevator, and my wife just looks at me and says, in front of your wives. That would make me feel uncomfortable. I wouldn't look at those guys and say, wow, that was something great to do. I would say, man, that was something weird to do. Why did you do that? But these are not the main reasons that the MMA community presents for their vitriol. Hilariously, these Trump followers have fallen victim to fake news that they themselves help spread like a phone game. Ultimately, it seems that in their attempt to embarrass Ian, they have actually exposed themselves.